Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. You heard the recording. I had a couple of folks that couldn't be here asked if we'd record it. I'm not familiar with that technology. It's probably putting some monster file with Chinese spyware onto my hard drive at the moment, but we'll try to do that for the folks that requested to be able to record this and see this later. One of the real promises of the Business Coalition, or one of the ideas, I think when we first started kicking the idea around, was to connect businesses and business-related organizations that were concerned about Great Salt Lake with good information and with key decision makers. And so today I'll share my screen just briefly. Let's see if we can find it because today's agenda is very much in that vein. Let's see here. So you get a little bit of Artemia branding here at the beginning because that's what I have to do to those all my templates look like that. But so really going to have some key people here, just give some updates in terms of where things are at. We'll start off with Tim Davis, who's the Deputy Commissioner in the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office. And Tim can tell you how long he's been in the saddle, but he's been working hard for Great Salt Lake and heavily involved in a range of issues. So he's going to give an update. Then we have Marcel Shoup, who's Executive Director of the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust. Marcel's really ground zero when it comes to water transactions, the heavy lift of actually identifying and moving water to the lake. We have Candace, I don't think she's joined us yet, but Candace Hasenjager, who's Director of the Utah Division of Water Resources, here to share some really interesting information that some modeling that they've done on just how much turf grass is in the valley of the Great Salt Lake, and helps us start thinking about implications for the lake and conserving the lake. Then I'll give an update on lake conditions, kind of where things are at, how the water year is shaping up. And then we'll talk briefly about the sign-in on letters, which you've seen email traffic about, and then just a nod to the legislative session and whether there's anything that this group wants to do in advance of the session to kind of get prepared for it. So with that, I'm going to back out of the screen sharing and invite Tim Davis, our Deputy Commissioner, to give us a little bit of update on the Commissioner's Office. Tim, thanks for being here. I know you're super busy, so thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Happy holidays, everyone. I'm actually back in Washington, D.C., and so that'll probably be my first update. I just want to say the continuing resolution is not my fault. So it's not the Commissioner's Office's fault. I'll just start there. But the Commissioner Brian Steed and I met. We've been back meeting with the delegation. We met with all of the natural resource staffers for the entire delegation, except for Congressman Moore's office. She's out of town for the holidays. And we really gave them an update on the lake, the current conditions. We talked to them and wanted to thank them for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has committed $50 million of Inflation Reduction Act funding for the Great Salt Lake. And we're working on getting that obligated to the Commissioner's Office in the next couple weeks. That funding will go to really three areas. One is leasing water for the lake, infrastructure investments that decrease depletions and would improve deliveries of water to the lake, and ecosystem restoration, including wetland restoration and removal of invasive species like Phragmites from the lake and its tributaries. So we met with the delegation about that. We talked with them about our goal to work to secure $30 million ongoing to implement the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan that we developed last year and was approved by Governor Cox at the end of 2023. And that $30 million that we're looking at, between 30 and 32 million, will be from a variety of sources. We're looking at state funding. We have 16 million in the governor's budget just for this year, not ongoing, as well. So it's private, raising funds from private sources, and matching that with federal funding. So one of our goals is to set up a program. And from the federal perspective, one of the things we're asking for is funding to allow the state to address the existing federal liabilities, whether those are Endangered Species Act listing, Clean Air Act, non-attainment from dust and particulate matter from the lake. And so providing the state, the commissioner's office, with funding to address those federal liabilities with the Great Salt Lake up front, rather than waiting until we actually get a listing under the Endangered Species Act, or have dust storms that cause the state to be in non-attainment for particulate matter. So there were good discussions. We're going to continue to work with the delegation on potential federal legislation and potential federal funding. As I mentioned, the governor did put $16 million in his budget, so for one-time funding. So hopefully that'll survive through the legislative session. And then the last thing I wanted to share with everyone and see if there are any questions is the commissioner's office is working on a implementation plan for the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan. We're calling it the 2034 plan, so it's a 10-year plan. It implements the middle term of the strategic plan, and it's really focusing on the three major levers that we need to pull to be able to get the lake back towards a healthy range. The first one is we need an increase in the amount of water that gets to the lake. So we're establishing a baseline goal for how much water is conserved, dedicated, and delivered to the lake by 2030 in order to get an inflection point of the long-term downward trend of lake elevation levels start to climb again. So we're talking about 250,000 acre feet of additional water getting to the lake by 2030. And then the second one is manage water between the North Arm and South Arm. So adaptively manage the Union Pacific Causeway berm and how water that comes in. So just so everyone knows, pretty much all the tributaries feed the South Arm of the lake, not the North Arm. Water flows through a breach in the Union Pacific Causeway from north to south to north. And in 2023, we closed that breach, and we were able to hold water on the South Arm, which, along with the record snow year, we were able to get out of the emergency that we were in when the lake hit its lowest recorded level ever. And then the last of the three big levers that'll be in the 2034 plan is we need to make sure that we take advantage of big water years when we have a lot of snow, work with the water conservancy districts, other reservoir owners to be able to move water to the lake when it doesn't have a negative impact on other water users within the Great Salt Lake Basin. So that will be released in the next month. But I'll stop there, Tim, and just see if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Tim. Any quick questions for Tim? We like to try to move this agenda fairly quickly because I know people are busy, and then if they want to hop off the end, but I know Tim has to go. So does anybody have any burning questions for Tim?
And if you think of anything after this and you want to email me or give me a call, feel free to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you, all your good work, and keep up the good work. And thanks for signing on for a minute here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Bye.
See ya. Okay, next up, we're going to have a report from Marcel Shoup, just updating on the great work that the trust has been doing. So we'll turn it over to you, Marcel.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you. And I'm really glad that this business council is really kicking off the ground. So I've got a couple slides to show you, but first I wanted to remind everybody that the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust is jointly managed by the National Audubon Society and the Nature Conservancy. We also work with the Community Foundation of Utah, whom some of you might also work with. They are actually holding the big pot of money from the state of Utah. We work very closely with the Commissioner's Office as well as Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands and the Division of Wildlife, particularly in our efforts to do water transactions. And we are we have a 9-member advisory council that was established in the legislation. And I have to say, we are so lucky to have that advisory council to help guide our efforts and our strategies, as well as help us make good decisions about how we lease water and actually fund wetlands projects. We issued a strategy this year in February, which I think I'm going to talk to this group about before, but we set a couple of our metrics are include reaching 100,000 acre feet of water on a diversion basis by 2028, as well as protecting or restoring wetlands habitats around the lake, and aiming to achieve a 20,000 acre foot goal. Those are two of the primary areas where we work, enhancing water flows, bringing new water flows to the lake, or keeping existing water flows going to the lake, and then also helping to support the protection and restoration of wetlands around the lake that actually benefit the lake's hydrology, an important factor. So how are we doing? The trust has been up and running for 2 years, so I'm just going to show you a couple slides. So last year, we transacted about 64,000 acre feet of water. And we do this in partnership again with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands and Division of Wildlife. Either or both of those entities are the entities that hold the lease or the water right and put it to use in the lake. 21,000 acre feet almost is permanent water. Most of that is the donation from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That change application got approved late last year. We have a little over 33,000 acre feet of water in multi-year leases. And currently, most of this is water donations as well. And then last year, we managed to do another 10 million, or sorry, not 10 million, I wish 10 million, 10,000 acre feet of water. But we only had about 3,000 of that made it to the lake because the change application hadn't been approved. But this year we've bumped that up and we've added, 13,000 acre feet one time this year, and some of those one-time transactions we hope to do again next year. This included an awesome transaction that involved 10,000 acre feet from Utah Lake that we were able to have delivered in the late in the late summer fall. So it was over the month of September essentially. And so at a time when the Jordan River flows are low, we were able to move that water down to the lake and provide the benefit to some of the wetlands, and that water went both to Farmington Bay and to Gilbert Bay, if you're familiar with where those are at. So we're again trying to continue to keep this number rolling and up, and we have several big leasing transactions that we're working on now and hopefully can get those approved next year. So again, I would just say that we couldn't do this without partners. We've been so lucky. A lot of the big water districts have been really focused on trying to figure out how they can help Great Salt Lake. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints continues to work with us to figure out what water assets they have that could be delivered to the lake, as well as private parties like Rio Tinto, Kennecott, and a number of irrigation companies that we're working with, duck clubs, and so many other people. So we're really grateful for that. And then I would just say that this year, last year, we went out and we 10 million of the $40 million that we have dedicated to the trust right now, 10 of that has to be spent for restoring and protecting wetlands. Last year, we awarded $8.5 million in grants to 8 projects. And then this year we partnered with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. They had $5 million in funding. We had another $1.5 million in funding. And so we essentially issued awards earlier this week. You might have saw a news announcement of about $5.5 million. And you can kind of see where, I don't know if you can see this, where all these projects are located, but around the lake. Happy to tell you about any of them if you have any questions. The ones that are orange are the new ones this year. And then the other thing I was just going to say is we've been, again, one of the things that we're focused on is actually, making sure that we have significant match for the funding that we have. And we have not calculated all of that for 2024. A large amount of that is for water transactions and donations. But we also had a really interesting water donation a financial donation this year from the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City and their environmental committee. And they provided a $35,000 gift that was matched by a number of their members, probably. And so I think we're up to about an additional 9,000. And that was to support water transactions for the lake. So we're excited about that. And as we move into 2025, at this point in time, we have about $26 million that is uncommitted, but that number is going to go down significantly as we execute some leases here soon. So anyway, that was a quick update. Happy to answer any questions. One of the things that I would just say, sometimes we're asked, well, 68,000 acre feet is kind of maybe doesn't seem like a lot in the context of how much water we're talking about for Great Salt Lake. But I think we all know that every drop counts in this situation that we're in now. And one of the things that we've been really excited to do is try to actually target the location of those releases to areas that really need the water, or do it at a time of the year when it provides additional benefits. So water into Willard Spur in the late summer, or water down the Jordan River to Great Salt Lake in the fall. So with that, hope that was quick enough.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Marcel. And nobody really outside of Marcel, really nobody outside of Marcel can appreciate just how difficult these transactions are. The process of identifying these big water rights and moving them in blocks to the lake and figuring out how they're distributed and everything else is immensely complicated. So she and her team deserve an enormous amount of credit for doing very difficult, challenging work to benefit the lake, and obviously working with a bunch of partners that make it all possible. So thanks for that. Does anybody have any quick questions for Marcel? Okay.
Tim, I was just going to say, I did fail to mention the awesome team that we have working here. And you might know some of them, like Max Monquist and Adam Wickline, and our new member of the team, Trip Armstrong, but they are working really hard, and we wouldn't be here without them.
Thanks, Marcel. If you ever need a bird identified by song, by whatever, Max Malmquist is your guy. I'll send him random audio files and he will get right back to me with exactly what bird it is. So great team. Thanks, Marcel. I don't know if Marcel will stick around for sort of, at the end of this, we hope to have just kind of open Q&A. Anything question that you have, and it's a coalition of the willing, if folks can stick around, they'll stick around. We can have a broader discussion, but I wanted to get through the agenda and then give people the opportunity to stay or leave if they'd like. So thanks for that. The next person on our agenda is Candace Hosniger, who directs our Division of Water Resources. Candace has been a real stalwart in water resources for many, many years. Pleasure to know her. She and I had a conversation, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I was trying to understand, for purposes of the TED Talk that was referenced before the call kicked off, how much acreage are we talking about? We're talking about acreage that's in Kentucky bluegrass that is just sort of, what people have at their businesses and in their yards and at churches and schools and things like that. So I think Candace already had some modelers that were kind of looking at that, but anyway, she's got some numbers and she's here to talk a little bit about that. Candace, thanks for being here. And you might be muted if you're talking.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. Thanks, Candace.
Hey, feels like my internet here at the state office building has been a little glitchy, so hopefully it'll hold through. Can you guys see my presentation? Am I sharing it correctly?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll just run through this real quick. And Tim did a great job about kind of laying out kind of the groundwork is really, why, and I kind of like to start like Simon Sinek says, you start with why. So why do we need this information? We're seeing increased population and urbanization in Utah. We're also seeing an increase or more diversity, extremes within our water resources, drier dries, wetter wets. And we know we're going to have a limited resources going to the future. And we're also seeing additional competing demands for these resources, right? It's not all about the people, it's about our waterways, it's about the birds, it's about Great Salt Lake, it's all of these issues coming together. In addition to that, we also know that lawn uses a lot of water. So our grass space, and I try to be careful to say that we are not saying that lawn is bad. We just want it to be where it's used and not as the default landscape. That's part of the questions that we've had as we've developed this landscape incentive program where we're paying residents to remove their thirsty grasses and replace it with water-wise landscaping is how much is out there, what bang for the buck can we get kind of out of this. So we have worked on developing this, what we call our green space model, but it's really focused in, so just to kind of set the groundwork, this is really focused in on municipalities. So in our M&I sectors, trying to remove as much farmland and everything as we possibly can. This is a remotely sensed product and analysis that we used. So of course, there's some margin of error, and you'll see that in the numbers as we give a range of numbers. But we want to have this data set available to make better decisions, enhance collaboration among stakeholders, and help achieve meeting the state water conservation goals. So what is the model? Generally speaking, it's a remote sensed driven tool designed to quantify the area of green spaces. So think lawns and parks and recreational areas, and really just to kind of give us a scale of what are we even talking about. So this is, we've done this across the state. I'll show both numbers for the Great Salt Lake Basin as well as statewide. So you can see detailed spatial mapping, water consumption projections, and scenario planning is how we plan to use it as part of our state water planning process that we're undertaking for the next couple of years. So another piece of it. So, and once again, this can be useful for state government, city planners. It can be useful for our policymakers, water utilities, research institutions to really understand kind of where are these big areas of grass, and then even from our residential communities, how much grass is within those areas as well. And so just to dive right into the results for the Great Salt Lake Basin. And so you can see on the right here a figure, and that all the little green specks kind of represent all of the green space. It's really
Hey,
small
Candace?
just because, we can't see your presentation.
Yeah, we're just seeing your desktop and not the presentation itself.
Okay. Let me change this. Sorry about that. I will get this moved. It's doing a weird thing. So, okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
There we go. Okay. So I went through a couple of slides. They just had some pretty pictures and kind of went over what I was showing, but just to stick on the results slide. So on the right, you can see kind of the figure that shows all the little green specks, and those are kind of represent the areas of green space. So looking specifically at the Great Salt Lake Basin, there's about roughly 135,000 acres of turf in grass in the Great Salt Lake Basin. When we look statewide, it's about 165. So still 165,000 acres of grass and lawn. It's really focused on the Wasatch Front is where the bulk of it is, which is in the Great Salt Lake Basin. Let's switch this. So, and then, kind of why we're doing this, and what is the potential for conservation and further analysis. So there's the opportunity to explore non-functional turf, and extrapolating water savings. What if we did a complete removal? What if we put it back, replace it with waterwise landscaping? And then we've made some assumptions, rough assumptions, and this gets a little tricky too when we talk about how much water savings there is, if Utahns overwater, just our grass in general, how much do we overwater? If we overwater it by 0.5 feet to 1 feet, we can have a savings between 65,000 to 135,000. And there are people who overwater more than that. So if generally we're able to reduce it by roughly 2 feet, we can get up into the 300,000 range of water saved, but really varies depending on how much people are overwatering. But we can make some gross assumptions to know that there could be a lot of savings in how much water we use in the Great Salt Lake Basin if we used our landscape in areas that if we used reduced how much grass we had, and then also look toward using waterwise landscaping in areas that we don't need grass. So that's generally just the quick analysis that I wanted to cover with you. Happy to answer any questions. I don't have my modeler here to kind of like go into all the details, but happy to talk through any questions you guys might have.
Hey, Candace, just one thing to clarify, and thanks for that presentation. So when we're talking about the water savings there at the bottom, this is if we didn't change any of the turf acreage, but people just watered closer to what's recommended for the grass that they have. So that's sort of the baseline, is this number that's here at the bottom. And then if turf was actually eliminated or turf was replaced with waterized, that would be additional savings over and above those rough numbers that you have at the bottom. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, you are spot on, and thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. So that's just to put in perspective for folks, like, when the commissioner's office was talking about stabilizing Great Salt Lake levels, they were talking about a target of finding an additional 200,000 acre feet. Well, there's some fuzziness in these numbers, but when they talk about finding additional 200,000 acre feet, you start to look, and boy, it could almost at least getting to a more sustainable Great Salt Lake where we're not in decline. We might be able to get most of the way there just by being smarter with our turf use.
And I would just mention, we do have, as I mentioned before, a waterwise landscaping or landscaping incentive program ongoing now. We do require cities to adopt water efficiency standards for new development for residents to be eligible for those incentives. But we are trying to help people make that change and make it more cost effective for them.
And is it just for residents, or does it apply to businesses as well?
It's a good question. We currently, has been focused on residential grass areas, but we are working to expand the program to include commercial facilities.
Thank you. Other questions for Candace? Really appreciate Candace and her team and the work they've been doing on this.
I have a quick question.
Okay, let's go Natalie, then Stephen. Go ahead, Natalie.
So it's a two-parter. Is this just applying to the Salt Lake Valley area? Is that what I understand?
No, so this covers we did the whole state, but when we say Great Salt Lake Basin,
Salt Lake Basin.
Cover the whole Great Salt Lake Basin.
Okay. And then was this information reported out during interim at all, or is this kind of its first?
I did present it last month during
Gotcha.
interim.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen, you had a question?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you for your presentation, Candace. Do you have any impression about, so you've got about 135,000 acres of turf in this basin. Is that number trending upward? I mean, are we seeing an increase in that with new development and growth, or are people, limiting their use of turf, or do you have any idea about how that overall number might be changing?
That's a really great question, and I don't have this specific answer right now. And as we continue to build out this model and kind of build out that trend line, I think it'll help us understand that kind of growth projections. I would say that generally we are seeing smaller lots, and we are also seeing more density within it. So even in areas that, are growing, I would say that we're hopefully seeing less of an increase because of that kind of higher density. The other kind of tricky part is we're also seeing areas that are being built out that never had water use on them before. It wasn't like a farm converting to a residential community or to a business center. It's now we're seeing areas that are developing that never had water on them before. So any increase would actually increase the amount of irrigated acres in that area. But that being said, we are trying to get new construction changing how they grow. So we're growing as water wise as possible. And once again, turf's not bad. It's just how you water it and where you put it. Put it in the places where you use it. We want our kids to be able to play on a soccer field and everything, our dogs to run and play and catch ball. But that doesn't need to be our default landscaping. So we kind of say if you only walk on it once a week when you mow it, it could probably be something else. And, that's often true for businesses that don't have active play areas.
Thanks, Candace. Any other questions for Candace?
I have one, Tim. It's Tracy.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Hi, Candace. Candace, I'm wondering, has the state allocated funding to do a broader awareness and education campaign, using media?
Yes. So we've had a long-standing slow the flow campaign that we've used for years, and it's been a really effective tool. This was about a year ago, the legislature appropriated one time 2 million, 1 million ongoing, and developed a public-private partnership called Utah Waterways that's expanding its kind of the education campaign across the state. So that is a great benefit that hopefully we'll get some additional good information coming out of it.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Candace. I think we'll leave it there. If you can stick around, that's great. If you can't, we perfectly understand if you need to go.
I just have to jump off at 4, but I'll be on till then.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm gonna back to my little slideshow here. I want to do just kind of lake conditions to let people know what's going on. All right, can everyone see my screen? You're looking at an agenda.
Yep, we're seeing it.
Okay, so we'll just talk about some lake conditions, kind of where things are at. I do sometimes feel like people sort of say, "Hey, we're mission accomplished," like President Bush there in the Iraq War. But the reality is, well, we've seen some positive things in the lake. We're a long way from being out of the woods. This is just trace line. It just shows lake elevations and where they've been. To some really nice over there on the right-hand side. You can see those really big water years that sort of brought the lake back from these critically low levels that you can see at the bottom. But you'll notice that it's also come down quite a bit. We had a very hot, dry summer, and that has implications for the lake. So this is just an overlay of the last 2 years. So if you look, the gold is basically what the lake did in 2023, and then the purple is what the lake did this year in 2024. But I think kind of the telling thing here is you can see that we started out in a much better place, but the lake didn't go up that much, and then it came down a lot. And so if you compare those two numbers at upper left, the lake is actually lower now than it was at the same point in time last year. So that just goes to show, we really, we had a second good water year, but basically that water year has been used up. This is another graph of just kind of the last 5 years roughly of lake up and down. You'll see generally it goes up, 2.5 feet and down roughly the same amount. But if it gets more down, that's that really from 2020 to 2022, we had very little up and these big severe downs. And then you can see that huge jump back up. That red part is actually where the gauge at Saltaire stopped working because there wasn't enough water in the harbor to measure it. But I like to put a little bit of an overlay on this. There was a lake health study done back in 2012. And it basically said, listen, there's the happy levels for Great Salt Lake, and then there's sort of area of concern, and then there's really sort of critical areas. And so the orange on this graph is kind of areas of concern. That's where functions of the lake are being impaired, whether it's the ecology or recreation or business or air quality, all these, there's some impairment going on. You'll notice that we spent the vast majority of the last 5 years in that range. And then below it is sort of the red. This is really critical. This is when we start to see loss of major ecologic or other function. And you notice that in 2022, 2023, we spent some time in that period. Well, today, we're right about there. So we're kind of in the thick of that area of concern, not critical, but not too far above those critical levels. I'll just point out, and I track these things. I probably account for many of the view counts in some of these websites, me and Candace and a few others that are on this call. But I love this trace from NRCS data, which sort of shows where we're at in the water cycle. How is our snowpack doing? And kind of you can see on this graph, the blue, that's the record high snowpack levels. Red would be the record low. And in the middle, you see that green line, which is average. And you notice that we start out this year roughly tracking the average, but then we went into a very dry period. We see it flatline, and we actually go below average down into, not a great place. And that's where we remain today. So our snowpack so far, now there's plenty of time for it to correct, is not in a great place. We have something else that's going on this year that I think is making it challenging, and that's that our soil moisture. So the amount of moisture that is in the soil, if you go down here a little bit less than 2 feet, the soil is quite dry. You'll see that these are not 100%, but particularly in the area of the Great Salt Lake, we're in the 60s, the 50s, the 70s. So the soil moisture isn't great. What that means is that the soil acts a little bit like a dry sponge. So you can imagine you have a dry sponge. Well, imagine you have a wet sponge and a dry sponge. If you put snow on top of a wet sponge and then that snow melts, it's going to run off. If you have snow on top of a dry sponge, when it melts, it just soaks into the sponge. Well, unfortunately, this year we have a very dry sponge. And even worse yet is when you have kind of, it gets really cold and it's been dry, then when you do get precipitation, it almost seals that dry sponge in there, kind of locks it in with a layer of ice above it and caps it off till spring. And what that means is that we're kind of assured not great, not a very efficient runoff. So even if we get above average snow, we might have average or less than average runoff. Bottom line, we're just one dry winter and one hot summer away from testing record lows. Again, that's all bad news. Now, there is some positive, and I forgot to do the slides for it, but the positives in this case is salinity because of the way that the state has managed salinity and an assist from Mother Nature, but this active salinity measures are really making a difference. Our salinity today is much better than it was when we were at the same lake elevations 2 or 3 years ago. So our salinity is right around 12% salinity. That gives us quite a bit of a buffer or a cushion before we start to hit really critical levels for salinity that would impair or threaten the ecosystem in the way it was threatened in 2022. So that's a little bit of a silver lining, is that the way that the states manage the berm has made the lake more resistant, or at least the ecosystem more in a better place, even if lake levels decline further. So I wanted to just shift before I do that, just any questions about lake conditions from anybody? Okay. If you ever want to, I mean, if you haven't found these websites on your own and you want a guide to them, let me know. I'm happy to point you to those so you can track them kind of in real time. I'm looking at them like almost every day, and I think a lot of folks on this call probably are. But the next thing I want to talk about is just we have the legislative session coming up, and just a couple of things on that score. So one is you all have probably seen sign-on letters, and these are sign-on letters that are thanking people for the $50 million that the Bureau of Reclamation agreed to dedicate to Great Salt Lake, thanking the commissioner for making that decision. Thanking our congressional delegation for supporting it, and thanking the governor and the governor's office for supporting those efforts. So it's just kind of an attaboy, attagirl for the efforts to help do something positive for the lake. And we've invited businesses, a variety of businesses, to sign on to those letters. Several of you have gotten back to me and said, hey, we're in. We're happy to add our signature at the bottom of those. If you haven't gotten back to me, and you'd like to sign on, please let me know in the next couple of days so we can make sure that your name and your business's name are added to these letters. Again, just very positive, saying thank you for taking a positive step to help Great Salt Lake. So in terms of the legislative session, it starts on January 21st. There will be some bills. I'm not sure how directly they'll affect Great Salt Lake, but certainly some bills that affect Great Salt Lake that deal with water supply. So we'll be watching that. There are some appropriations requests, for example, the 16 million that Tim Davis alluded to. So there's some things to push if you care about the lake. And one of the questions that we'll have as a business council is whether and to what extent we want to engage on those issues. And so one of the things to plan on is in early to mid-January, we'll have another one of these calls where we will try to highlight the bills that implicate or have a potential impact on Great Salt Lake. Same with appropriations requests to the extent that we're aware of them. And one of the questions that I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can see more people. But one of the questions that we have as council is, do we want, for example, in advance of the session, to send around a letter to all the legislators in the governor's office and say, hey, we're the Great Salt Lake Business Council. We care about the lake. And maybe what we could do is share the set of principles that we were working on earlier this year about how businesses value the lake. Businesses want policymakers to take it seriously. Businesses, want to be engaged in constructive solutions. So one of the things we could do is potentially in advance of the session is, again, send out a letter to the entire legislature that says we're the business council. Here are the principles that we support. And we hope that you will support the lake as well. So that's a fairly positive, non-threatening thing that we could do. But we can discuss that further in January, but I'm happy to take temperature now too, if people think that's a good idea, bad idea, or somewhere in between. So let me just throw it open. Thoughts on that and or just questions that you're having about the lake and where things are at. Looks like Natalie's cool with that. Love the thumbs up. Thank you. Tracy as well, Stephen. Okay, so we'll look to do that. And what we'll do in advance of that is maybe circulate that list of kind of principles that we were talking about to make sure everybody's comfortable with that. And then we'll draft a letter and think about getting it out in advance of the session. What about just questions that people, if you're hearing stuff in the media, the press, if folks need to leave, you're fine to leave. But if you've got questions for any of the presenters today, or just in general things you've been wondering about, we have quite a bit of the brain trust of Great Salt Lake on this call right now. So have at it if you have any burning questions about what's going on.
Tim, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on anything that's happening on mineral extraction in the lake. I mean, US Mag's been in the news lately, and then there's other, do you have any updates on that, and positive or negative?
Well, I think that I think legislation passed last year. We do have Brian on who might have an opinion, but the legislation passed last year, which was interesting in that it sort of really forced mineral companies to the table in terms of working with the state if they have big extractive footprint. As a result of that process, Compass, for example, had a very large water right that it's not using, but it actually dedicated to that to the state. And Compass actually agreed that if the lake hit certain critically low levels, they would not divert any water at all. They wouldn't pump any water at all. US MAG is, I think, US MAG's challenges go beyond lake elevation. So they just have some real strong business headwinds that they're facing. One of the things that's interesting is that we have, Candace is posting a link if you want to look at Great Salt Lake conditions. There's a site called the Hydro Mapper, and it's a great way to look at that. But US MAG has these other headwinds, and so they've largely shut down. I think they're hoping that as a critical mineral, the federal government will come in and help bail them out. I will say one thing that's interesting is the way that the funding is set up in a lot of these accounts is in a certain degree, it's dependent on the success of the mineral extraction companies. So when I was in the legislature, I passed a bill that said, for example, if companies successfully extract lithium and they pay royalty on that lithium, then that goes into a fund that is used to protect water supply for the lake. So the mineral companies have very much been a part of the solution. I mean, I think they're aware of their footprint. Right now, US MAG is not pumping. Compass is, and some of the other smaller ones continue to extract minerals. But the mineral companies, by and large, have been very much engaged, collaborative with other stakeholders to try to find solutions and to be part of the solution. That's what I'd say. I don't know if anybody has anything to add, or Brian, if you have anything to add on that front. Not to put you on the spot.
Oh, it's fine. So one thing I would say, I mean, I do have to put out the disclaimer that I don't represent all the producers on the lake, but one of the concerns that that Tim just alluded to, the less the producers are producing, the less revenue is being generated for some of these conservation and other activities that we've been talking about today. And especially US MAG, who again I do not represent, but they're not in a good place right now. They have not been producing for quite a while, and a lot of that has to do with global factors that are far beyond the lake, especially in terms of the commodity prices. But it's very difficult for these guys to compete in an environment where they're competing with state-controlled actors and others that are pushing down global prices for these commodities that they're producing. And also if they're, getting actions from, mostly the federal government, but occasionally even the state government that, make it hard for them to stay in regulatory compliance. And so, I mean, I do think that there's a really important balance we need to be talking about in terms of, how we're encouraging those mineral producers on the lake to continue to produce the minerals that we need. I mean, just with US Magnesium going offline, the second they go offline, we become 100% dependent on foreign magnesium imports for, all kinds of the industries that use magnesium. And so it's really not just a lake issue. It's a national security and economic security issue. So again, some of these factors don't have anything to do with the lake, but, to whatever extent the state can encourage continued production of these vital resources, I think that's really, it's important not to lose sight of that.
Right.
Thanks, Brian. I think there are some efforts to try to just figure out, it is hard, I mean, to do it economically, but to find technologies that will be more water wise and still deliver the yield. But there's always a cost component there that's quite tricky. So Martha, you've got a question? I think it's Martha.
Yes, hey, Martha from Ski, Utah. Yeah, you guys are doing amazing work. I'm always excited to learn about the updates and stuff. I'm just curious if there's anything I can tell people, like the normal passerby skier who wants to maybe help and contribute themselves, to helping support saving the Salt Lake. I don't know if there's certain things they can, give money to or projects or things like that. I'm just starting to talk about sustainability more in the ski world, and everyone's always trying to look for that easy way for themselves to try to make a difference. And I didn't know if anyone had any ideas in that realm.
Yeah, so Martha, I think that's a great question. And I think that's one of the things that would be really nice to refine, something to really, because again, the skiers come here, they like it, they want to contribute in positive ways. We have several NGOs on this call, all of whom, Friends of Great Salt Lake, Grow the Flow, and others that are working on the lake, Nature Conservancy, National Audubon, all working on the lake in positive and constructive ways. I will say one of the most direct impacts, something that Marcel alluded to, is just giving it to the trust, which has been able to match it and do a lot of amazing work with. And that goes direct to water supply in really kind of a fundamental way. So it is kind of interesting to think about, if you can do a check off or something like that, where a dollar, every, dollar goes to the trust. I mean, that's a really great way where really the money is already matched, going to water supply. So any of you NGOs that want to weigh in with your pitch, you're welcome to do so. But Martha, I think there's a lot more that could be done in that. And it's really kind of connecting, empowering people where they feel like they can do something that they know has a positive impact. That's really where I'd like to get. So if I save water on my lawn, this is not for skiers that are from out of state, but for people that are in state, if I go to the trouble of ripping my strip, I'd love to know that some of that water, at least a portion of that water, is going to go to Great Salt Lake so that I feel empowered that my actions are making a difference.
Tim, those are really great ideas. And Martha, another idea that you might consider is actually having a visual photo display of Great Salt Lake and perhaps some labeling as far as a relationship with the watershed, as far as being at Snowbird and Great Salt Lake, and how it's, a part of the whole. So people recognize that dynamic and the importance of, they're supporting a resort. Snow is really important to that resort, and it's also important to Great Salt Lake.
Thank you. Those are awesome ideas. I'll definitely write them down, take them into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. Other questions from the group? Questions or comments? I'm happy to take reactions too if somebody just wants to react to anything they've heard.
So Tim, when we were talking about the mineral extractive industries and the economic significance that they contribute to the state's GDP and so forth, would you mention the state engineers' expectation to create a water designation plan for water use in the lake? Is that kind of relevant to how are parts of the whole of all of the resources considered when we're dealing with particular inflows, particular elevations, and particular resource needs?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lynn, and I'll try to do it. It's a rather complex question, but I'll try to give a high level. So one of the real genesis behind the bill that kind of put the mineral companies put a target on their back in the last sessions was this reality. So in a drought year in the upper part of the watershed, say you're a farmer and you have a really senior right, like an 1870s right. I mean, the oldest rights are in the 1860s, even 1850s. But let's say you have an 1870s right. It's a pretty old right. But in that drought year of like 2022, you were getting cut back. And many farmers were being cut back significantly. But the mineral companies, if they had a water right, even though it was maybe a 1960s water right, that said, if the water's there, you can take it. So people in the headwaters with really senior rights may be getting cut back, but in theory, mineral companies weren't getting cut back. And so the idea was, well, listen, we have kind of drought distribution plans for water users. We somehow need to find a way to get mineral companies sort of engaged in that. And I think that's the distribution plan type model that the state engineer's office is trying to develop, which is how in times of scarcity do we share that burden equally and fairly among water users? And so that's the effort that's, I think, underway there, but that's kind of the context behind it. So it is an important effort, right? People need to know. But I think that's one of the challenges for mineral companies is there's been some lack of certainty about their water rights, and that creates uncertainty, and that's what is really the enemy of business. It makes it hard to borrow money and all that kind of jazz. So we really need to tie up some loose ends there. Any other questions, reactions? Oh yeah, Jake.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag another potential opportunity for kudos, which is that the Great Salt Lake Stewardship Act on the federal level just passed through the Senate on Tuesday. And so that's reallocating any unused funds from the Central Utah Water Project towards Great Salt Lake conservation efforts. And we got word from one of Senator Lee's staffers that it could be up to $100 million. I'm not sure if it's going to be that much money, but just another sizable federal investment coming through towards the lake that's pertinent to this group.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Appreciate that. Marcel, do you have any context on that you want to add? I'm putting you on the spot, but
Yeah, it's not a direct contribution to the basin or the lake. It's really that if they have the funding, then they can use it on water conservation type projects in the basin. I think I'm saying that right, but it's a little bit complicated. And Candace may also have some sense. So it's a good thing, but it's not like the $50 million that the Bureau's directing.
yeah, which is right there for Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
But still a step in the
Yeah.
right direction.
Yeah, I would
As
just
long as the
add,
underlying project is a good project, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, there is
Sorry,
that, right,
Candace.
Marcel?
well, I was just going to say the thing that, I mean, yes, of course, the 50 million we're super excited about, and we are working fast and furious with the Bureau right now to try to get that all under contract before the administration change. So the Bureau is working at a lightning pace to help us achieve that. I would say the other thing I think is a really good benefit is just the amount of collaboration that's going on with our federal partners. The Bureau of Reclamation, USGS, the Army Corps of Engineers is, starting to get heavily involved as well. Fish and Wildlife Service. So there's a lot of efforts on the federal level, as well as trying to coordinate them. So we're not recreating the wheel for each different federal agency. We're trying to coordinate those. So yeah, lots of good things going on there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Candace. I mean, the military with their Sentinel landscape project has kind of gotten into the game. So there's some really good community building going on. Thanks for that. Okay, we're about out of time, but any last minute burning questions, comments? I welcome your feedback, participants, just on the meeting. Did you find it useful? Was it value added for you? Is there additional things that you'd like to hear about? We will schedule sort of a legislative preview here in 3 or 4 weeks to talk about what's going on in the session and maybe a few other things. But I appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedules to be here, and a lot of you are engaged in different ways on the lake, and thanks so much for all the good that you do. And if we don't talk, hope you have a happy holidays.
Thanks,
everybody.
Tim. Great to see all the interest.
Thanks,
Next.
Tim.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.